Hello again, friends. I am Steve Taylor, one of the illustrious crew at FThatNoisePod.com. I'm continuing my series, Steve Attempts to Read, and we'll cover chapters 8 and 9 of The Lockbox in this video. This and the previous videos are now streaming on both YouTube and at our website, FThatNoisePod.com. There's also multiple links at my personal website, STaylorBooks.com. You just have to go to the Other Media tab, and you'll find the links to these videos. As always, this video and all other content will be brought to you by Trashman Media. Trashman Media for the latest home video reviews of films you may not see in your local Redbox. Visit them at trashmanmedia.com. Also brought to you by Bizarre Abyss, the site dedicated to news and straight talk. Visit them at bizarreabyss.com. Also, don't forget to check out the #1 podcast among people reading to you right now. That would be myself. F That Noise. Check us out every Monday night at FThatNoisePod.com. And parents, the podcast is just for kids, just for adults. No kids whatsoever. It is very R-rated. Usually we go 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, around there. Every now and then we'll do a special. I know this week will be 9 p.m. And as always, if you like what you hear today, even though I am not the best reader, if you enjoy the story, you can find The Lockbox and Homecoming, which is the second book of the series, at Amazon.com. There are links on my website, STaylorBooks.com, for both the hardcover and the digital version of the books. I am currently working on book 3, Mama. I'm hoping to have that done by the end of the summer. And I'm also working on a children's book, which should be interesting. But without further ado, we are going to continue on with The Lockbox. This is going to be chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8. After a short flight, Ethan set the massive helicopter down. It had been 45 minutes since their escape from the hospital, and they had traveled northeast, then circled back west, landing in the middle of a desolate canyon in the Seedskadi National Wildlife Refuge. This wasn't the most ideal of landing zones, but the chopper had taken damage during the attack, and Ethan had no choice. Still in shock over the loss of his friend, Ethan was silent as he helped Sam out of the back. Emily had already stepped out and vomited profusely. Once they were able to compose themselves, the group spent the next few minutes camouflaging the helicopter the best they could, with branches and leaves from around the area. After completing their improvised helicopter disappearing act, the trio looked around at the empty vista. Scanning for any sign of life, they set out in search of help. The hour was getting late, and they had a phone call to make. In the brutal midday sun, the 25-minute walk seemed like an eternity. Eventually, the battle-scarred and road-weary travelers stumbled upon an empty ranger station. After checking to see if the coast was clear, Ethan posted Sam and Emily around the perimeter as lookouts. Using some skills he picked up in his youth, he easily picked the lock and entered the station. To his delight, there was not only a phone, but also keys to the four-wheeler parked on the side of the small building. After a brief call to Joe, Ethan grabbed the keys and tried to cover his tracks the best he could. They didn't need any more pursuers. Collecting Sam and Emily from their posts, Ethan fired up the all-terrain vehicle and drove off as fast as he could, with the 2 passengers hanging on. Ethan drove south, traveling far enough to feel safe from being discovered if the ranger returned and noticed the missing vehicle. After hiding the ATV, Sam rushed everyone into a cave he found while surveying their temporary safe haven. Emily collapsed onto a soft patch of moss that covered a large area of the dark cavern floor. She was asleep almost immediately. Ethan and Sam both sat against the cool cave walls, each sighing with relief after escaping the oppressive heat. Following a period of welcome silence, Sam tossed a rock at Ethan's foot, surprising the dozing sheriff. "So, what's the plan?" Ethan wiped the sleep from his eyes, still slightly hungover from the previous night's party. I was able to speak with our new friend, and he's on his way to meet us. Where at? He's said to be at the Greater Green River Intergalactic Spaceport by 10 tonight. Why the hell are we meeting him there? He said it's the most desolate place near us and he can land. What is he picking us up in, the Millennium Falcon? How the hell am I supposed to know, Sam? Maybe he is. Sam rested his head back against the wall as he pondered his new development. Do you trust him, Sheriff? I don't think we have a choice. I mean, it seems we've lost every friend we have to these assholes. Resting his head against the wall, Ethan's eyes fluttered shut. And I told you already. Call me Ethan, he said to Sam. I'm not the sheriff anymore. Not since they destroyed our town. With that final statement, the cave fell silent. Sam was the only one who remained awake. He fidgeted with his sling as the pain had gotten worse after their most recent escape. He wished they had borrowed some more of the morphine he was given at the hospital. Left alone with his thoughts, Sam finally let the true scope of the day's events sink in, the silence temporarily broken by the gentle whimper of his sobs. Today, Sam became the man of the family, and he was living an adventure right out of a spy novel. But right now, he would trade it all for the comfort of one of his mom's hugs. Break. Greater Green River Intergalactic Spaceport, 10:12 p.m. Since arriving at the desolate airfield, Joe had spent his time pacing impatiently. His small Cessna Citation Mustang remained fired up and ready to go at a moment's notice. He had landed 18 minutes prior, and to his dismay, the sheriff and his companions were nowhere to be seen. The abandoned runway was eerily quiet in the darkness, save for the hum of the Cessna's engine. Joe had his night vision binoculars, and he nervously scanned the horizon for any sign of his passengers. He was about to give up hope when a small vehicle appeared in the distance. It looked like an ATV, but from the distance it was hard to tell. The one thing Joe became certain of almost immediately was that it was whatever it may have been was indeed speeding his way. As the vehicle sped closer, Joe was able to make out two passengers hanging onto the driver for dear life. Peering behind the ATV, the reason for their high rate of speed came into view. About a mile back from the small vehicle, there were three large SUVs, hot in pursuit. Gotta go, Joe said as he ran towards the small jet's open hatch. Settling them behind the wheel, Joe brought the plane around and started taxiing towards the oncoming vehicles. As he approached the ATV, Joe slowed to a crawl and flashed his lights. The small vehicle skidded to a stop, and the three occupants leapt from the ATV and ran for the open hatch. The SUVs were now less than 500 feet from them and closing fast. Looking back at his new cargo, Joe shouted out orders. Shut the damn hatch and buckle up! Now waiting for affirmation, Joe steered away from the oncoming trucks and fired up the twin jet engines. As the small plane began to pick up speed, the sound of gunfire rattling off of the rear of the Cessna. Not wanting to test the durability of his new borrowed toy against the effects of bullets, Joe punched it and the jet roared down the runway, lifting off into the air. Break. As the plane disappeared into the night sky, Joe let out a deep sigh of relief. It had been far too long since he had seen this caliber of excitement, and he didn't miss the stress. Setting the autopilot, he stretched his arms and rose from his seat. Excuse me. He had guests to welcome and a lot of questions that needed answering. As he made his way back to the small cabin, Joe was shocked to find the barrel of a gun pointed at his forehead. Ethan had been waiting for him with his own set of questions. Who the hell are you? Joe was shocked by this new development, but not surprised. My name is Joe, and I can assure you that I am not your enemy. And unless you can fly a plane, I would suggest you put the gun down. Ethan pulled the hammer back on the pistol. I'll be the judge of who or what is our enemy. Now start talking. Joe had begun to raise his hands when he relieved the sheriff of his weapon in one blinding motion. Turning the weapon back on the surprised man, Joe held Ethan's gaze. I'm here to help, and we don't have a lot of time to screw around with this pissing contest. Joe popped out the magazine and expelled the round from the gun's chamber. After disarming the weapon, he handed it back to Ethan. Now, can we please have a seat and talk about the situation? There is much to discuss before we reach our destination. Ethan accepted the weapon and sat down in the nearest seat, still in awe over what just happened. As Joe sat down across from them, he scanned the refugees. All three were covered head to toe in dust and mud. The young girl had multiple scrapes over her head and neck, which oozed a small stream of blood. Sheriff Cole looked to be in good health, just exhausted. The younger of the two men was in the worst shape. His left arm was hastily tucked into a sling, while his right ear was missing a good chunk. Blood seeped through the bandage that was barely hanging onto his ear. As Joe approached, Sam sat up in alarm. Easy, young fella, Joe said as he motioned for him to remain seated. My name's Joe. May I ask who you and this young lady are? Sam shifted in his seat to a more defensive position. I'm Sam Lana, and this is my sister Emily. Emily looked up and waved in acknowledgement. Well, it's nice to meet you, Sam and Emily. Joe reached for Sam's ear, causing him to recoil. Sam, I really should have a look at your ear. It looks like it may be infected. Sam reluctantly accepted. Joe peeled back the bandage, causing Sam to wince in pain. Just as I thought. It's pretty bad. Now stay still and don't touch your ear. Joe moved to the rear of the plane and retrieved a small medical kit. As he sat back down next to Sam, Joe opened the box and removed some bandages and a small vial of liquid. I need to clean this wound and give you a shot of antibiotics. Now, I also have a small dose of morphine, which I could give you if you wanted. Sam perked up at the news. I'd most definitely be okay with that. Joe looked over at Ethan for permission, and Ethan just nodded his approval. Retrieving the small syringe from his kit, Joe jabbed the needle into Sam's shoulder, immediately causing him to grin with a satisfying hum. As Joe worked on Sam's ear, he addressed Ethan. I assume you're Sheriff Cole? Ethan sat cautiously watching the procedure. I would prefer you call me Ethan. Well, Ethan, that was some impressive driving back there. Can't believe you had that thing going so fast with 3 of you on board. It's easy to do the impossible when you're being chased by the devil. I see your point. Finishing his work on Sam, Joe closed up his kit and cleaned up the small mess he had made in the process. As he moved back to his seat across from Ethan, he reached into a side compartment and pulled out some water and snacks. He passed them to the 3 passengers, who immediately began devouring the bounty. After a few minutes of peace, Joe interrupted the meal. Now, I have some questions for the 3 of you. Sam swallowed a large bit of granola bar and tried to suppress his narcotic-inducing giggle. We have some questions. Also, why the hell are we getting shot at? Who were those assholes in the cheap suits? Hold up, Sam. I understand your frustrations, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I need to know what has happened in the last few days leading up to today. The more I know, the more I can tell you. Sam tried to speak, but found it difficult now that the drug was taking its full effect, so Emily stepped in and began the story. She started from the morning Sam found Mr. Kerr's envelope and ended with the chase onto the airstrip. Joe looked at the 3 of them with both respect and empathy. I can't begin to express my sympathy over the terrible losses you have suffered today. This scenario was never supposed to happen. Emily wiped the tears from her eyes. Why did my mom and dad have to die? Joe looked at her. It was a tragic mistake that you all became involved, but I promise that their sacrifice will not be in vain. Ethan sat quietly by as the story was being told. He became visibly agitated as Emily described the murder of the Shoshone police force as well as the execution of Jesse. As the thought of their loss festered in his mind, Ethan became infuriated and he couldn't remain silent any longer. I think it's about time you tell us what the hell is going on, and I don't want you to hold anything back. We deserve to know everything. Joe looked behind him at the control panel. The flight was on time and as smooth a ride as he had ever felt. He turned back towards the group, confident he would have enough time to fill them in. Very well, Ethan. You are due an explanation. Joe took a long swig of his water and began his story. Everything leading up to today began in 1934. As you may or may not know, Antarctica is one of the last places on Earth not claimed by anyone. The brutal climate makes it nearly uninhabitable. Over the decades since it was first explored back in the early 1800s, small groups of scientists and explorers have braved the elements to search for whatever secrets may lie in the bottom of the world. Sometime in the early 1930s, Adolf Hitler had taken power in Germany, and he focused much of his efforts on strengthening Germany's military and defenses. He had spent years dispatching men around the globe in search of treasures that would help them to gain an advantage over other countries. It was during one of these expeditions based in Antarctica that a small Nazi excavation team discovered a meteorite buried deep within the ice on the coast of the Ross Sea. After recovering the large rock from its hibernation, they began to test their find. To their delight, these tests found that the minerals that made up the meteorite were not only alien to this world, but also highly explosive. After some further testing, the scientists discovered a way to stabilize the explosive properties of the rock enough to remove samples and convert them into a fuel that could be highly effective when used as a weapon. With their prize in tow, the Nazis left the excavation site with high hopes of the future of this discovery. Everything was running smoothly up until 2 days into their trip back to Berlin. That's when the battleship began being used as transport for the meteorite hit an iceberg and sank. The next day, a small group of survivors were rescued by an American cruiser on its way home from a training exercise in the Falkland Islands. It was here that one of the Nazi survivors told them of their find. He had been the only scientist to survive the crash and the only man outside of Berlin with knowledge of the destructive potential buried within the meteor. Sam raised his hand. You're telling me this whole thing is about a stupid space wreck? Joe took a swig of his water. I know this sounds a bit crazy, but let me finish, please. Sam slumped back into his seat. Looking around in his drug-induced state, he realized Emily and Ethan were both glaring at him. I'll shut up. Jesus. Joe cleared his throat and continued the story. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. It only took the Americans 2 days to recover the meteor from the wreckage of the Nazi ship. After its recovery, the meteor was shipped off to a secret location in the Midwest, and the Nazi prisoners were sent to a prison complex in Hawaii, with the exception of the poor soul who knew about the meteor. He spent the next 20 years of his life relegated to solitary confinement at Alcatraz. Irritated by what she just heard, Emily interrupted. That doesn't sound legal? Ethan looked over at her. It was a different time then, hon. And we did things that were thought to be right. It's just the way it was. Whatever, she grunted as she slumped back down into her seat. Following the interruption, Joe continued. The meteor was put under years of tests by some of the greatest minds of our time. At first glance, our government was just as giddy with the discovery as Hitler was. Understanding the importance of keeping the discovery secret, only a few top officials in the government even knew about its existence. Some conspiracy theorists have even speculated that the specifications for the first atomic bomb originated from alien technology. If only they knew just how right they were. The meteor was the cornerstone of the research leading up to the Manhattan Project, but it was agreed that the rock itself was never to be used due to its immense power and its unstable nature. Ethan cleared his throat, drawing Joe's attention. If it was such a secret, then how do you know all of this? I'm getting to that. Now, after World War II ended, the government buried the rock deep under its complex at Area 51 in New Mexico. Having just witnessed the destructive force of both bombs dropped on Japan, President Truman was terrified of what the meteor could do if it fell into the wrong hands. It was on his order that it was moved to New Mexico. 13 years had passed without any further discussion about the meteor. In fact, after Truman left office, only a few members of the intelligence community even knew of its existence. It wasn't until the winter of '57 that our communication channels discovered chatter pertaining to the rock, which it was sometimes referred as. Earlier that year, the reasons for his incarceration were brought to question, and subsequently the Nazi scientist was released from prison and returned to Germany. Unfortunately for our government, time and horror of his confinement didn't cause him to forget about the discovery that precipitated his detainment all those years ago. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. They just let him go? Shouldn't we have had a serum that could have shot him with? Didn't we have something to maybe erase his memory? You've been watching too many movies. Other than a full frontal lobotomy, there wasn't anything we could do. And after 20 years in that hellhole, those who knew about his existence had either died or retired. As with many things in our government's web of red tape and history of incompetence, he slipped through the cracks. Sam spoke up. So what happened after he spilled his guts? Well, this is where we get closer to answering your original question, Sam. Around the same time the prisoners were released, the CIA began to hear whispers about an organization in Europe that specialized in freelance terrorism. Their actors were rumored to have touched different societies around the globe for centuries. This shadow organization was comprised of men from all over Europe and Asia. There was no allegiance to God or country with them, just to the cause of making money. This was done through their love of creating anarchy. To be honest, it was only dumb luck that we stumbled upon them. Who the hell are they? Ethan asked, now fully engrossed in the direction the conversation had turned. We don't know, Joe responded. Like I said, we only heard rumors, nothing concrete. In the interest of giving a title to this group, the agency nicknamed them Echo. Emily sat up in her seat. Why Echo? It was just a name that someone thought up early on in the investigation, something to type on reports. Sam snorted. Well, that's stupid. Not really. I have always thought it fit them. Their actions have caused ripples in every society going back centuries. It's as if their touch has echoed through time. Joe gave a quick glance back to his controls, checking to make sure they were still on schedule. Turning back, he realized that the attention span of the group was fading fast, so he better get the point of the story. Anyway, Echo had become aware of the meteor, and it was the mission to find and offer it up to the highest bidder. A prize of this magnitude would be priceless in the black market. Afraid that the meteor's location was compromised, the head of the CIA put a plan in motion to relocate the rock from New Mexico to a secret military facility located deep within the Adirondack Mountains. The transport carrying the meteor, now encased in a steel bomb shell, landed in Georgia on February 5th, 1958. The B-47 bomber carrying the package was to refuel and immediately take off for upstate New York. And that's when tragedy struck the mission. As fate would have it, after taking off, the B-47 collided with an incoming F-86 just off the Savannah coast. Ethan interrupted the story. I heard about this on the Discovery Channel. The B-47 was carrying a nuke of some kind, and after the crash, it was forced to dump it into the ocean. It took place during a training accident, if I'm not mistaken. Exactly right, Sheriff, and that's what the government wanted everyone to think. Can you think of a better way to hide the truth of something than to make the world believe it was something else entirely? It ended up being a useful occurrence. Now, after the casing splashed down into the ocean, the Navy sent multiple ships into the area to guard the crash site. Everyone was under the impression that the payload lost was really a hydrogen bomb. Hell, the pilots didn't know what they had in the cargo hold. Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA at the time, used his power to smokescreen the entire recovery operation. Once the Navy had secured the site, all communication pertaining to the payload would be directed through his office and nowhere else. Even President Nixon was left in the dark. Not wanting to raise suspicion, Dulles made sure the Navy didn't rush with the recovery efforts. Since he knew exactly where the meteor was, no one was going to take it from under their nose. So what happened with the search? Sam inquired. About 2 years after the accident, the government had no luck in locating the bomb, so they called off their search and considered the weapon lost. Getting frustrated, Sam threw his empty water bottle to the ground. I still don't understand what this has to do with us. Okay, lad, just calm down. I'm getting to that. Joe checked the cockpit once more. Everything remained on schedule. Turning back, he continued. Now, fast forward 16 years. It's 1976, and I was a rookie agent with the CIA. My first assignment was to join a veteran in Moscow to help gather all the intel he could on the Soviets and its leader, Leonid Brezhnev. I would end up spending the next 14 years of my life with my new partner and friend, Gerald Simmons. You kids might know him as Jerry or Mr. Kerr. Joe paused a minute and let the bit of information sink in. The kids both turned towards each other and mouthed the same curse word beginning with an F. Gerald and I quickly formed a bond built on trust and mutual respect. He saved my life a few times, and I would return the favor on more than one occasion. After the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War had ended, there was no one left to fight, so Gerald decided to retire. It was during our last drunken night in Berlin that he told me the story of Bend, Oregon in 1963. He had been tasked with watching a former government agent who had disappeared a few years prior. During his surveillance, Gerald witnessed the agent's brutal slaying. After Gerald dispatched the assailants, he rushed over to the dying man. Before he took his last breath, the man handed over what now lies in the box sitting right over there. Joe pointed down below Sam's chair at Mr. Kerr's lockbox. Within that box is the only map with the hidden location of the lost meteor. Even though Gerald was able to uncover the history surrounding the meteor, the only surviving person with the story of how it was located and moved from the bottom of the ocean died in 1963. What I do know is that those men chasing you are some of the new order of Echo. They have never given up hope on finding the meteor, and it looks like they are determined as ever. Ethan leaned forward. Why did Agent Simmons, move to Shone Peak? Well, he was from Wyoming originally. Gerald was born and raised in Cayenne. He figured that no one knew that territory like he did, and seeing that Shoshone Peak is just a small blip on the map, it was the perfect place to disappear. After he had settled in, I received a letter from him. It was coded so that only I knew its contents. In the letter, he informed me of his location, and after some further correspondence, we had set up this failsafe in case anything happened to him. The cabin fell silent for a few moments before Emily spoke up. So what are we going to do now? Joe looked at his watch. We have another couple of hours of flight time until we reach Wisconsin. What's in Wisconsin? Sam asked. That's where we're going to land and stash this plane. From there, we need to make our way to my place in Chicago. Once in Chicago, we need to get you kids to safety. You have already suffered enough for 10 lifetimes. There's no point in putting you through any more. Standing, Sam looked over at Emily, then back to Joe. We have just lost everything important to us. Everything we knew is dead, and our house was burned to the ground. We're not going anywhere until this is finished. Defiant in his statement, Sam sat back down, never taking his eyes off Joe. Joe looked at Ethan for help. He just shrugged off the glance. Don't look at me, man. I wouldn't want to be the one standing in their way. Shaking his head in frustration, Joe stood and looked down at the three passengers. Get some rest. We'll discuss this after we land. Making his way back into the cockpit, Joe resumed his position behind the wheel of the Cessna. In the dimly lit cabin, Emily, Ethan, and Sam all drifted away into a well-deserved slumber as the first light of a new day began to glow off in the distance. That is the end of Chapter 8. I hope you're enjoying it. It is getting super exciting. Chapter 9 is coming up. It is a shorter chapter, so the video doesn't have too much longer. I know we're pushing the boundaries on our half hour. So I hope you enjoy Chapter 9. July 30th, 8:35 a.m., the Drake Hotel, Chicago, Illinois. The sound of shoes scuffing along the floor echoed through the peaceful hotel room as the morning sun arose on another day. In the master bedroom of the exotic suite, a groggy figure was awakened from his vodka-induced hibernation. As he sat up in the plush king-size bed, his sluggish gaze lazily scanned the suite for the source of the disturbance. In the adjacent sitting room of the suite, a middle-aged woman dressed in a light blue maid's-out uniform was straightening up. She was humming away to the music pumping into her ears from the small MP3 player tucked beneath her apron. Retrieving the new linen she brought from the bed, she looked into the open bedroom door. Upon noticing the man staring at her, the maid gasped and lowered her head as she pulled the earbuds out and stuffed them into her pocket. Please, I am so sorry. I knocked, but there was no answer. You didn't have a do not disturb sign out, she pleaded with her voice trembling. Stretching, the man pulled back the covers, exposing his tanned and muscular physique. He was a bronze statue, strong and flawless. His long auburn hair draped down his back, the strands of gray peppered throughout, now shining in the morning sun. As he stood, the woman froze in place, her body trembling in shock over his lack of clothing. He was not shy about his exposed body. In fact, he strutted with a confident swagger. Stopping in front of the frightened woman, the man slowly scanned her body. Why are you shaking, my dear? Is this any way to treat a guest of your beautiful hotel? I'm sorry, sir. I should have checked if anyone is here. I'll just leave and give you some privacy. As she turned, he grabbed her arm and pulled her ear close to his mouth. I don't remember dismissing you, he said, as he reached out and began to caress her cheek, her soft skin moist from fresh tears. A quiet buzzing emanating from the computer in the main room of the suite interrupted the now tense situation. Excuse me, my dear. Work beckons. The man placed a soft kiss on the trembling woman's forehead and then released her. Turning his backside to her, he walked over to the computer. He grinned as the door of the room slammed shut behind him. Another satisfied customer. The computer buzzed to life with different encryption sequences loading. After patiently waiting a second for the program to boot up, he sat in the leather desk chair and entered his 13-digit code, connecting him to the incoming message. The screen changed over to a video feed of a small figure hidden by shadows. Are you alone? An electronically distorted voice inquired at the other end. I am. It's good to see you're still alive, Saber. Now, can you please explain to me why your team is wasting our time and money when the package is still at large? Saber was taken aback by his employer's sudden rise in tone. Excuse me, but you do not ever address me in that manner. I have sacrificed much in the pursuit of your little trinket, and I deserve respect. Enough of your posturing, Saber. We are not impressed by your incompetence. Saber fell silent as the shock of his employer's audacity paralyzed him. We will not tolerate excuses. This organization has sought after this prize for decades, and we have never been closer to revealing its true location. Now, I have read your report and find the fact that they disappeared into thin air hard to believe. Can you explain? Still shell-shocked by the conversation, Saber cleared his throat. Whoever picked them up was connected. After the plane landed in Wisconsin, they drove into Chicago and just vanished. The line remained silent. So after the trail went cold, I decided to take a night to regroup before continuing the hunt. We will tell you when it is time to rest. Until then, you will continue with your assignment. Now, can you take care of the small task alone, or do we need help handling these children? Slowly standing, his hands clenched into fists, Saber leaned into the microphone on the laptop. It will be done, ma'am. With a sudden swiping motion, he sent the computer crashing against the wall to his left. The remaining pixels of the screen flickered, then disappeared behind a wall of darkness. Saber remained standing, his exposed backside facing the morning sun. The veins in his neck pulsed with a seething hatred for those who he took orders from. The effect of his recent conversation boiling over, causing him to let out a roar of frustration. His loud cry sent an echo throughout the top floor of the building, sending his man in the adjacent room into a panic frenzy. The front door exploded open as Holger barreled his way in, his pistol raised in preparation of whatever he might find. To Saber's chagrin, Holger was naked, except for a pair of silk boxer shorts covered in pictures of SpongeBob SquarePants. Are you all right, sir? I heard shout. Noticing that Saber was fully exposed, Holger shaded his eyes in embarrassment. Saber took a deep breath and relaxed his clenched torso. Looking over to the large man standing in his doorway, he just shook his head in disgust. Have you ever heard of knocking, you dolt? Still hiding his eyes, Holger apologized for his entrance. I'm so sorry, sir. I hear screams and thought you might be in trouble. The only trouble I have is that my men are all 300-pound ignorant children. Saber walked into his bedroom and recovered the plush terry cloth robe hastily thrown on the leather recliner in the corner of the room. He approached Holger as he cinched up the belt. I have just been informed that we have rested enough. Go wake up the others. It's time to get back to work. Yes, sir, Holger shouted as he turned and quickly exited the uncomfortable situation. Saber turned back to the desk where his former laptop had rested. Retrieving a small leather billfold from the desktop, he opened it as he rubbed his left temple. The situation had forced him to change tactics, and he began to feel a sense of nostalgia over the loss of one of his favorite aliases. He had used the persona of Special Agent Johnson many times in the past, but now the ID had been compromised. Normally, those who discovered his ruse never lived long enough to cause him to precipitate a change, but the current developments had forced his hand. Goodbye, old friend, he uttered as he threw the badge into the fireplace. As it burned away to nothing, Saber pondered his next move. It was time to find that which eluded him. And that is it. Super exciting, and it's only going to get more exciting from here. Once again, I hope you enjoyed everything, and if you did like what you hear, this is The Lockbox, and this is Homecoming. You can find these on Amazon.com in paperback or digitally. I do ask if you do purchase them, I would appreciate a review on Amazon. Like it or hate it, I just want a review of some kind, and all criticism will help me grow. And there was also a contact tab on my website, staylorbooks.com, where you can send me questions, concerns, ideas that you think you would like to see the story go. I take any and all information in, and I appreciate all criticism and, of course, all praise. But I thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you next week.